The Taliban announced a caretaker cabinet for their keenly awaited government for Afghanistan. Well, the announcement comes more than 3 weeks after the hardline group took the capital, Kabul, unopposed, and U.S.-led troops pulled out of the country. The Taliban have pledged to establish what they say would be an inclusive government. And we can take you now to Kabul, Afghanistan for these breaking developments. Ali Latifi is joining us from the capital. Ali, we just heard about some key positions for a new caretaker government. Who stood out for you?
I mean, one of the things that stood out was the omission. Mullah Hibatullah was not on the list, and he is the leader of the Taliban. As far as we know, he is the second longest serving leader of the Taliban. So it raises questions about rumors that have been circulating for quite a while that he may not be alive. Why wasn't he named the head of this Taliban administration? When we had met with Taliban officials a couple of weeks ago, they insisted that he would be coming to Kabul, that he's very much alive, that he has been in Afghanistan all this time, and yet now he's nowhere to be found on the list.
Now, a lot of people are also talking about Sirajuddin Haqqani. What can you tell us about him?
He's the leader of the Haqqani network, which is considered to be the most violent and brutal segment of the Taliban. Usually in the past, when there were really horrific suicide attacks and other kinds of attacks, when the government would release its findings, the former government, they would say that it was the Haqqani network behind them. And the Haqqani men have been known to be the most fierce, the most brutal, the most violent faction within the Taliban all this time. And him being the interior minister will raise a lot of questions, especially now that protests are picking up around the country.
And it's also a very interesting choice because in terms of the international community, which, some countries have said they need to engage with the Taliban, it's going to be very difficult to engage with somebody who used to be part of the Haqqani network.
Well, right. And most of these men, and they're all men, the one thing that they did do is that they did include Tajiks and Turkmens and non-Pashtuns within their government. Yes, most of these men are on some kind of a terrorist list or some kind of a UN travel sanction list. So it will be interesting to see how the rest of the world engages with them. Now, of course, now that they have a government, to the Afghan people, one thing that is very much important is financial re-engagement with this country, because we still have, banks where people are waiting hours and hours in line to, just try and take out any amount of money. I myself today, for instance, when I went to take out money from Western Union, they were like, well, we can give it to you in Afghanis, but we can't give it to you in dollars. And you have to come back, a few hours later when we get the money we're waiting for from the central bank. So, it's very important to the Afghan people that some kind of financial re-engagement begins. But of course, for the rest of the world, it'll be difficult because the people that they're trying to deal with, almost all of them are on some kind of a terror list.
That is very striking indeed. Do we know how long this caretaker cabinet will be in place and what follows? I mean, are we expecting elections to take place in Afghanistan?
They haven't, as far as I know, they haven't said anything about some kind of an expiration date about it. And I think part of why they rushed to announce this is one, for the economy, because as long as there is, for instance, no Minister of Finance or Minister of Foreign Affairs, people who work in these places cannot return to work. And if they cannot return to work, they can't get a wage. And the economy has taken a huge dive over the last 3 weeks. The other thing is it's a way to not make them seem weak or disorganized. It's a way for them to say, we have established some kind of a cabinet until we have something more formal and official to go by.
And this comes, of course, on a day where we see people in Kabul, especially, they're still keeping up the pressure on the Taliban. There have been protests taking place. What more can you tell us about that?
So there were several protests in the city today. Some had, a few dozen, some had a few hundred. And in the larger ones, and the ones that numbered in the hundreds, possibly in more than 1,000, we saw that the Taliban were very much shooting into the air, were trying to disperse the crowds in violent and aggressive manners. People I spoke to said that they had suffered injuries, or they knew people that had suffered injuries, and that they had taken injured people to the hospital. But everyone I spoke to said that they will continue to hold these protests and that they will not be silenced, because they want to make sure that their voices are heard, especially at this time, even with the Taliban increasing all of this pressure. And as I said earlier, the prospect of Sirajuddin Haqqani, being the interior minister, which would put him in charge of reacting to these sorts of things.
Ali Latifi reporting from Kabul on those breaking developments. For now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as Ali has been reporting, the Taliban faced little military opposition when they reconquered Afghanistan. But as Ali just told us, opposition among civilians remains. Let's find out more about the anti-Taliban protests earlier in Kabul.
A taste of what resisting the Taliban looks like. Men with guns attempting to silence the men and women armed with their voices. The hundreds of Afghans who took to Kabul streets could not match the Taliban's show of force.
The Islamic government is shooting at our people. They're very unjust. They're not human at all. They do not give us the right to demonstrate. They're not Muslims, but infidels. As you can see, what a situation we're in.
It's a situation these protesters may have seen coming, but it didn't stop them from coming out to demand freedom for women and more freedom for all, a right they say the Taliban curtails. Initially, Afghanistan's new law enforcers had only watched passively.
We're not here protesting to gain something or to find a job in some office. We're here to protect the blood of the youth. We're here for our country, our land.
Another pocket of defiance has been located north of Kabul in the Panjshir Valley, where the National Resistance Force insists it is still standing, despite the Taliban's claims of victory in the region. The Taliban's predominant control of Afghanistan is not in question, but the signs are that it faces a more resolute public on its return to power.